Hey everybody, what's up? Fluff here, back at you with another deck profile. Today we are looking at Xeno Gogeta. But before we get into the deck profile, make sure to do the YouTube-y type stuffs. Like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. It really helps us out a big deal. If there's something that you want to see us do, leave it in the comments below. If you have any comments on this deck or any input or something that you'd like to see with this leader or this archetype in general, let me know. So getting into the leader, I actually played this past weekend at our locals. It did extremely well, and this deck has done fantastic in testing. And I know that it's gotten a little bit of attention, but I don't think people are getting exactly how good this deck is. So I wanted to run my profile through. So starting out, we're looking at the leader, front side, Son Goku and Vegeta. Basically, when you play a card using Union Fusion, you get to draw. When you attack, you get to draw a card. Then you get to take one card from your life, up to one card from your life, add it to your hand. And then activate main, you get to send up to the top 5 cards of your deck to the warp. So it's kind of like burst, but not really, because it goes to the warp. This deck, you really treat the warp as though it were essentially a second hand, and you'll see why as we go along. When your life is at 4 or less, you get to draw one card, choose one of your energy, switch it back to active mode, flip the card over. On the back side, we essentially get to keep a lot of the things that we like on the front side, except, we still get to draw when we Union Fusion. We still get the auto when you attack, you get to draw a card, but your warp, the top 5, up to the top 5 is attached to your attack. So you don't get to do that on activate main. You have to do it on the attack. Then you also get to activate main. You choose one card from your life, add it to your hand. Pick 2 of your battle cards with energy costs of 1, and they gain 10,000 until the end of your opponent's next turn. So the leader gives us a lot of hints as far as what the deck wants to do. It's a Union Fusion deck, but it's also a 1-drop. What would you say, Bancroft? Like a 1-drop control Zerg? Because it's got aggro components, it's got control components.
No, it sounds all right to me.
Yeah, it's like a late game control Zerg. And I was really put off by the fact that it was a bunch of 1-drops, because it's like, think about how easy it is for any deck really to just get rid of 1-drops. But you put them out so fast and so efficiently that the removal almost doesn't matter. So that's the leader. We're going to get the leader out of the way. We're going to start by looking at our Unison. So our Unison is going to be Pycon, Savior from Another Time. So permanent, if he has 3 or less markers, he doesn't get to attack. He is a 15,000. But he is a +1. Activate main, choose up to 2 of your 1-drop battle cards. They gain 10,000 power until the end of your opponent's next turn, which is a great way to bump up your 1-drops. And then he's also -3, activate main. Play 1 black battle card with an energy cost of 6. And the Union Fusion skill from your warp or drop area. So that's a ton of advantage to play a free battle card with -3. So if your opponent ignores this, you get to play a big card later. You can use this to constantly boost and keep up your 1-drops. And basically the way that the deck runs, you almost keep a Pycon at all times. And Pycon really becomes the red herring of the deck. Because a lot of times when I've played this deck, people will just focus on Pycon and they'll swing hard into him to try to get him off, keep him off the field, or keep you off of being able to resolve that -3. This deck isn't really defensive, I would say, and having that red herring on board, is oftentimes the difference between a game win and a game loss, because your opponent is putting so much energy to keep Pycon off the field. They're utilizing so many of their attacks to getting Pycon off that you're really preserving your hand size for your push, and you're preserving your life for your opponent's later game pushes. So for Pycon, it's an absolute must. Then kind of the partner in crime to Pycon is the Supreme Kai of Time, summoned from another dimension. This card is kind of weird. It functions incredibly differently to nearly every other card that I've seen in the game so far. So basically, when she's in your warp, you get to activate main for no energy, place her at the bottom of your deck, and then you choose one black unison with no specified one unison, or it's one black unison with no specified cost and 15,000 power from your warp or hand and play it. So if you have it, you can also control no unison when you do that as well. So if on turn one you burst you warp the top 5 cards of your deck, you hit a Pycon and a Kai, you will bottom deck the Kai and you will play the Pycon for no energy. So it's a fantastic way to do it. Your opponent later in the game kills your Pycon, you overwhelm, you put your Pycon in the warp, and you've got a Kai in the warp or a Kai in your hand that you comboed off into the drop area. You have another Pycon to play for free. So you can essentially play this Pycon up to 8 different times over the course of a game. Though usually you will play maybe 3 or 4, depending on how hard your opponent tries to get rid of them. And if your opponent just leaves them, then the Kais are kind of useless in your hand. They're just combo. Or you could pay 1, put her out, make her a 14,000 with the Pycon, make her a 24,000 with the Gogeta leader, and she just becomes pressure at that point. So however it happens to shake out, she's kind of useless other than free playing the Pycon. So we want to take control of that. This is one of the key pieces of the deck, and really this Kai is what makes this deck. She's not the expensive piece of the deck, but she is, I think, the consistency behind the deck. So we do play 4 and 4 there. Moving into our 1-drop package, because it is a solid 1-drop and one that I thought was going to be on the recent ban list, is Dark Power Black Mass Sand. I really thought this card was going to get hit. This card is fantastic. You pay 1 energy, put it out. It forces your opponent to deal with it or punish for tutoring out low battle power cards. So yellow generally has an at the ready response. Red generally has an at the ready response. Green can usually deal with it pretty well. But black and blue have a little bit of difficulty dealing with him. So you'll know what Dark Power Black Mass Sand does. This card is fantastic. Against a lot of decks, it's an auto charge target because it's not applicable to the way that they play. But other decks, it really punishes your opponent for trying to deal with him or having to play through him. So we do play 3 of those. It's not always constant, but it is good enough to include. And even if you wanted to, you could include it in a 4, though I would probably, in a best of 3 format, include it at a 1 in the side deck just to shore up and have the 4 in those games you really want to have them. Then, continuing the 1-drop package, we've got Son Goku Catastrophic Premonition. I played this guy at a 3 of. I would probably play this more at a higher density than a 3 of, but he does have unique. He is a double striker 5,000. When your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand using a non-player or non-leader skill, this card gets plus 10,000 until the end of your next turn. So if it's during your turn, you start swinging, you've got one of these guys on field, your opponent activates a super combo, draws a card, he gets plus 10,000. You can then swing with him 15,000 double strike. If you've got a Pycon, you've probably bumped him up to 25 double strike. If you activate the leader, he's 35. Then on your opponent's turn, they activate another super combo and they draw another card. He then becomes a 45,000 double strike that will then get to restand and still be a 45 and will then be a 25,000 double strike because of his auto. And you'll be able to bump him right back up with the leader and unison skill to a 45. So tons of pressure. It can become a huge problem for your opponent if they're not ready to deal with these guys. But again, unique, you can only have 1 at a time. Though usually you don't need more than 1. And there are other targets that we want to load the field with. So 3 of these guys because they're good. They're also Union Fusion targets later on. The partner to that card is Vegeta Catastrophic Premonition. Essentially the same thing as the Goku. He does have unique, but he is critical instead of double strike. And then his plus 10,000 power condition is if your opponent plays a battle card with an energy cost greater than their current energy, he gets plus 10,000 until the end of your opponent's next turn, which really comes into play sometimes, especially if your opponent isn't expecting that boost during a combo and maybe they rival or they end up like comboing like a Freehan or something and play it out just to get out of the attack. You know, Freehan's not totally relevant, but launch is really big right now. King Piccolo is really big and plays cards in their combo steps. So these are really important. The Vegetas are probably more important than the Gokus, but still, because of the unique tag, we're only going to play 3 because it doesn't matter. We can only have 1 on the field at any given time. Now onto the Goku that we do play 4 of. We've got Son Goku True Fighting Spirit. This is probably the MVP of the deck, especially against more defensive decks. So he does have Deflect. Your opponent can't counterplay him as he's being played. Add 1 card from when he attacks. You get to add up to 1 card from your life to your hand. If you do, it gets 10,000 for the turn. And then once per turn, if your opponent, if your leader card is a Black Sand and your opponent activates a counter skill, they choose 1 card in their hand and send it to the warp. So the way that the deck works, you can basically put 4 of these guys on the field at the same time. You're playing against blue. They activated Dimension Magic. Part of the cost to activate that Dimension Magic is now warping 4 cards out of your opponent's hand. So, you know, you can be in situations where you have 7 or 8 1-drops on the field, and your opponent, in order to survive, has to warp a nice chunk out of their hand out. So 4 of these guys want to get these on the field and have these on the field when we go off. Especially in early turns, you know, warping 1 card here, 1 card there is incredibly effective. And then the go-home turns, when we have wide boards, we want the opponent to really be punished by activating their skills. So 4 of Goku True Fighting Spirit. The partner card to that is Vegeta True Fighting Spirit. Very similar to the Goku. Punishes your opponent for basically playing their deck. Though the Vegeta is probably a little more specific. Actually, I think this is very similar to one of the silver bullets for blue. If your opponent restands their energy using a non-awakened skill, then your opponent has to warp a card out of their hand. So again, in the instance of like Dimension Magic, you know, if you're playing against a blue deck and you have 4 Gokus on the field, 4 Vegetas on the field because you've been playing your deck, now that is a very hard game state to match. But in the event that you had this and your opponent activates Dimension Magic and restands one of their energy, they have to warp 8 cards out of their hand. So, you know, they are 1-drops. They're easy to get rid of, but your opponent can't counterplay them. And again, he does have the plus 10,000. He is a target for Pycon. He is a target for Gogeta, the leader. And you'll basically be able to just create tons of pressure, making these guys 15,000 or 25,000, swinging, taking a life, making them 25 or 35,000. Just makes them incredibly difficult to combo out of unless your opponent counterplays them, in which case you're still advantaging in some kind of way. So 4 of the Vegeta. That wraps up our 1-drop package. You know, it is probably near half the deck for the 1-drop stuff, but the rest of the deck really kind of advantages what those 1-drops do. So next we'll talk about the Union Fusion cards. Up first, we've got the Gogeta Fearless Fusion. This is probably the more vanilla of the 3 available fusions right now. Though I say vanilla in the most loving kind of way, because when he's played, you choose one of your opponent's battle cards with an energy cost less than 4 and warp it, and he's also blocker. The really interesting part about the way that the Union Fusion on all of these Gogeta pieces operate is you may choose cards in your warp for the Union Fusion skill. So typically it would be out of your hand. You'd place the Union targets from your hand to the drop area. But with these guys, you would be able to use cards in your warp, place cards from your warp to your drop area. So if I had a Goku in hand, but I didn't have a Vegeta, but I had a Vegeta in the warp, I could Goku from the hand, Vegeta from the warp, and make a Gogeta. So this guy's only 1 black energy to Union Fusion out. He is also a blocker, 16,000. So all of the Gogetas that we're going to have today have that. You can choose battle cards. You can choose a Goku Xeno or Vegeta Xeno from your warp instead of your hand. So they all have that, which also makes that burst super valuable for us. And it also makes Overwhelms more engine providing than anything else. So the next Gogeta is what I would consider to be our playmaker, and in tandem with Pycon and Kai. But this Gogeta SS3 Marvelous Might, again, for 1 energy Union Fusion, he has Barrier, he's a 20,000, still gets to play out of the Warp. But for another 1 energy, you play Marvelous Might to the bottom of your deck, you put him to the bottom, and then you get to play out a Goku Xeno and a Vegeta Xeno from either your drop or warp. They can't be combined, so you can't play like a Goku from your warp and a Vegeta from your drop. You have to actually one or the other. But you can only play him once your opponent has 2 energy, so he's not a very good turn 1 target. Even though he only costs 1 energy to Union Fusion, you more want Fearless Fusion on turn 1 if you're going to Union Fusion on turn 1. Though typically I think I'd want to establish like a Black Mass Saiyan or one of the True Fighting Spirit Vegeta or Gokus to cause your opponent to start to make weird plays to avoid triggering their skills. So 4 of those guys, Playmaker, probably best card and one of the best cards in the deck. And then rounding off the current available Gogeta package, we do play 3 of the SS3 Gogeta, Martial Melee. This is a Union Fusion for 3. He's a 25,000 double strike. And then activate main once per turn. Place 1 Goku Xeno, 1 Vegeta Xeno from your drop area. Put them into your warp. Then switch this card to active mode. So really this can be a great way to close the game out. It's a great way to bait out your opponent's negates or make them tap their energy to respond to him. So tapping 3 energy in this deck sucks a lot. And to get it counterplayed kind of hurts, but if you're playing the game appropriately, then they're counterplaying this guy and tapping themselves out against your 1-drop spam. So I rarely ever close games out with Martial Melee, but he is there. He's another Union Fusion target. We more likely, though, when playing him, want to play him with Pycon's -3 ability, where we're going to be able to play him for free from the warp. So instead of paying 3 energy to Union Fusion him, we usually want to combo him off, make sure he's in our warp, and then if we can activate Pycon, play him for free. So this card or the Marvelous Might would be the 2 targets. Set 13, this dichotomy kind of changes, and we get another really good turn 1 Gogeta play that makes this deck all the more stronger. But we're not there yet. I'm sure I will go over the deck once we get there. Then kind of moving into the Overwhelm package, I play 3 Trunks Time Regulator. This is a setup card. Basically, we get to Overwhelm, we draw 2 cards, then place 1 card from our hand into our warp. We can place a Goku Vegeta into the warp. We can place a Gogeta into the warp. We can place a Kai or a Pycon into the warp. There's a ton of really good cards in this deck that you could warp from your hand that provides you some value later in the game. I was testing the Bardock Overwhelm, that is the 20,000 draw 2 drop 1, but I didn't like setting up the graveyard the way that I liked setting up the warp. So if you have I said graveyard, but it's drop area. But if you have a Pycon in your warp, but you have a Kai in your hand and you have a Trunks, you could Overwhelm, warp the Kai from your hand, get your 2 draws, and then get to play your Pycon for free. So this just sets up plays, and it's a 15,000 relevant. It's just a really good card. The other kind of utility Overwhelm, kind of the opposite of the Trunks, is the SS4 Son Goku Beyond All Limits. This card lets us basically add a black battle card with an energy cost between 3 and 7 from our warp to our hand. So if we need a Gogeta piece or we need some other card, we could add them back. So we won't be able to get our 1-drops back. We won't be able to get our Unison back. We won't be able to get our super combos back, but that's okay. There are plenty of good targets. So you could add a Gogeta, you could add a Trunks, you could add another Goku, you could add, we play another card at a 1-of that sometimes gets warped, and adding that card back can really strike fear into your opponent. Even if you don't intend on playing it, adding it back kind of puts that card on your opponent's radar and will make them start playing weird. So 3 of those guys, fantastic. Another card that could easily be an MVP in this deck. Slightly more generic here, we've got the super combos, the Super Saiyan Vegeta, the Prince Strikes Back, quality super combo. I love them in this deck. I don't like putting things back into the deck, but I like finding specific pieces and then getting rid of something that's not helping me at the moment. So 4 of those, it could easily be the Sparking Trunks or something like that, but you do overwhelm, so Sparking is probably not the best idea. Then I do play Hidden Power, East Supreme Kai. This is just, it's a double strike. I mean, we've got the big overwhelm Goku. We've got the 1-drops that get pretty big for little investment. You can swing, put a double strike on something. It makes a lot of things in the deck threats that otherwise wouldn't be threats. And I was playing the SS2 or SS3 Tag Team Gohan. This dude was playing this, but I realized this weekend at locals, someone was like, do you have Kai or Champa in hand on one of my swings? And I said, no, I didn't. And I could have won the game then and there if I'd had the Kai or Champa. So it won't always come up at a one of, but I do want the option if it's there. So then I was really torn on what secret rare to play or if it needed a secret rare, really. The long answer there, I'm not going to get into now. The short answer is it doesn't need a secret rare. But if I were going to play a secret rare, I would have played Heroine's Lineage just for the utility, the versatility this card provides in the deck. But you don't need a secret rare. You don't even need like a high cost Dark Overwhelm. That's probably more side. I'd probably side this, like side deck your secret rare, not main deck it. So I'd probably side deck the Heroine's Lineage or the Supreme Kai of Time, whichever one you have at your access. But in lieu of a secret rare, I am playing the Dark Masked, whatever this dude is. It's Dark Masked King Devilish Dominator. Sorry, that was rough. But this card, because of the way that the deck plays, pretty much always gets to come out for 4. He's a triple strike. He's deflect, 25,000. If your opponent negates the attack, then they're going to warp a card from their life. And then sometimes your opponent has overwhelmed, and he gets to satisfy if your opponent has 10 or more, switch this card to active mode after it attacks. So you get basically a dual attack triple strike because your opponent is overwhelmed. Doesn't always come up. I don't always play this card, but this card has won me games before by just playing it and making the opponent take the critical damage on the if your opponent activates a counter, place 1 card from their life into their warp. So just one of those, doesn't always come back. If we mill it, we can get it back with the Goku if we need it. If we have it in hand, we'll just keep it in hand as kind of like a dirty little secret and surprise our opponent. If they see it somehow, then we just kind of use it as a fear tactic to make them play around it, which means they're not playing efficiently. Extra cards, I don't run a lot. Like I said, the deck's not incredibly defensive. I run 3 Power Bursts. There's a ton of 1-drops in the deck that you could get back from Warp or Drop with this guy. I truthfully hardly ever use Power Bursts. I will usually use them to stop a game-changing double strike or triple strike. Or if I suspect my opponent is going to swing combo out Champa or swing to get an alliance or a rival, I will Power Burst. But that, and then rounding it off, is 2 Super Kamehameha. One thing this deck really hates is this deck hates Topo. This deck hates Trunks Heroic Prospect. This deck hates basically the Floodgate battle cards. So we can't really do much about like Dormant Potential or Flying Nimbus, but we just have to play around those ideas. But Super Kamehameha will force the opponent, like an Exploiting Weakness Vegeta without this card will actually kill the entire, like blow up your entire field. But if you have this, your opponent wasted 3 energy and you get to, for no energy, send the card to the warp instead of playing it, which means you get to keep your field and your opponent wasted 3 energy. So 2 of these, I'd probably side a third one in, for more relevant matchups, and then also have the option of taking them out in matchups that it's not relevant. Like the card is not super relevant against blue. It's not super relevant against green, but it is pretty good against yellow. It is pretty good against red, decent against black. So that is, I believe that is a 53 card deck, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe Bancroft can count if that's wrong. It's either 53 or 55. I don't exactly remember off the top of my head. It doesn't matter because we burst. You know, you can burst as many times as you're comfortable with. You shouldn't be threatening a deck out. You don't have to burst every turn. Typically, if I've done the burst tactic twice where you top 5 into warp, you have 10 cards to play with in your warp plus everything that you're overwhelming. That's usually enough to see the things that you need, and I wouldn't do that again unless you're specifically missing something that's going to move the game state forward. So that's my deck profile. Xeno Gogeta deck is super good. Deck is surprisingly good. Tanner was actually playing in Michigan and had come back from Michigan and said, guys, like, Black Gogeta is really good. And we all kind of laughed at him and like, no, like, that deck's not really good at all. And I just kind of on a whim put the deck together and was super surprised by how consistent and ferocious this deck is. I would think in my kind of experience, the only deck that is more consistent than this right now is probably Red Brawly. As far as like its inevitability, King Piccolo is probably up there with that consistency. But this is really good. It doesn't brick often, and when it does brick, it just has another line of play. So give the deck a shot. It's a lot of fun. Thanks again, guys. I know I kind of rambled on this one. There was a lot to talk about there. But hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was informative. If you'd like to see me start doing side decks for profiles, let me know. I will start building side decks. I did talk this time about it. But anyway, thank you guys so much. As always, read your cards, know your plays, let us make the mistakes so you don't have to, and fluff out.